recording right here. Okay, I'll just give it one more minute. Welcome everybody to the panel of autistic journalists. My name is Leslie Zucker, and let's see, I'm gonna just get my presentation up here. So anyway, sorry about that. My name is Leslie Zucker, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the founder and president of the Columbia Journalism School's Alliance of Journalists with Disabilities, the affinity group at the School of Journalism at Columbia for students with disabilities and our allies. I'm also the co-founder and president of the Columbia Student Disability Network, a campus-wide disability justice and affinity space at Columbia. Both the Alliance of Journalists with Disabilities and the Columbia Student Disability Network are sponsoring this evening's panel. We have a very special treat for you tonight, and that is that 4 autistic journalists will be joining us. The dominant stereotype of autistic people is that we are white, male, and that we are obsessed with computers. These misconceptions can culminate in those of us who don't fit these stereotypes in being misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all. As a result, I was only diagnosed as autistic last year at the age of 36. Due to my misdiagnosis, I was misunderstood and didn't fully understand why I was the way I was. Knowing that I am autistic has allowed me to accept myself for who I am and embrace my own identity as a proud autistic person. When people think about autistic people, too many don't realize that we can be journalists and that we are journalists. April is Autism Acceptance Month, and that means accepting all autistics, even those of us who don't fit the dominant narrative. Now to introduce our panelists. Eric Garcia, he, him, is a senior Washington correspondent for The Independent and a columnist for MSNBC. Previously, he was an assistant editor at the Washington Post Outlook section and an associate editor at The Hill, as well as a correspondent for the national journal MarketWatch and Roll Call. He's also written for the Daily Beast, The New Republic, and Salon.com. Garcia is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He wrote the book, We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation. Sara Luterman, pronouns they, she, is a caregiving reporter for the 19th. Her freelance reporting in the nation was shortlisted for the 2021 Deadline Club Mosaic Award, which recognizes excellence in coverage of disability, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, social justice, equity, and inclusion. Sara is also a contributing editor for Radiolab. Zack Budryk, he, him, is an environmental reporter for The Hill and co-hosts the podcast STEM for STEM with Charlie H. Stern. His writing has been published in USA Today, The Guardian, and The Washington Post, and his first novel, the crime thriller Judith, was published in 2016. Charlie H. Stern, he, is a staff writer and photographer at Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the founder of STEM for STEM, co-hosted with Zack Budryk. Elsewhere, their photo work has been published by The Associate, Dazed, Bitch Media, and UK outlets including Metro, Evening Standard, and The Times. I have
The Advocate.
What'd you say?
The Advocate, not The Associate.
I'm sorry, The Advocate. Sorry about that. I have some questions I have prepared for the panelists and some others that have been sent to me by attendees. If there's anything that you'd like to ask, please feel free to type it in the chat box. Without further delay, let us learn from some talented autistic journalists. And now for the very first question. Introduce yourself as you would introduce yourself to a fellow autistic. Who are you? What are your special interests? If you could info dump about one subject, what would that be?
I think I'll go first. This is me. This is Eileen Wernos. I have a special interest in, I think, women who have perpetrated crimes that the victims deserved. And I think also continuing with that sort of messy mindset, I could info dump about the entire 90 Day Fiancé cinematic universe.
Thank you. Sara, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, my name is Sarah. My special interest is novelty snack foods. I recently inflicted taco truck jelly beans on all of my coworkers.
I want to try that.
It's exactly as disgusting as it sounds. And if I was going to info dump about something, it would probably be Star Trek because I'm a stereotype.
Cool.
We love that you're a stereotype.
Now, how about Eric?
Hi, my name is Eric Garcia, he, him. I think my special interest would be elections, particularly elections going back to the 1980s and the rightward shift of the Republican Party. And I think that if I were to have a special interest, it would probably be Marvel movies or 1960 or 1980s heavy metal bands. So one of those. So
Awesome, thank you. And what about you, Zach?
Hi there. My special interest is the history of American organized crime, and I keep telling myself I'm going to get together a book proposal about how it dovetails with the history of the American experiment, the American dream in general. And the thing I could probably info dump the most about is either that or just movies in general.
Okay, what is the negative definition or stereotype about autism that you'd most like to dispel?
I can take that. I don't know if it's worth dispelling because, okay, so my example would be lack of eye contact. And, with, I think all of us on the panel know the Michael Falk character from The Onion, autistic reporter. I will say that in person, oftentimes, a non-autistic person can clock an autistic person by lack of eye contact. But I don't think it's a bad thing. And I've noticed over the pandemic with much more limited social interaction, I've kind of lost the ability to make eye contact. But then I sort of started following the gazes of non-autistic people, and they don't really make eye contact either. So that's mine.
is that Mr. Bird, by the way, Charlie?
Right now, talking is one of the parakeets and Paris the cockatiel.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure because I love Charlie's birds very much.
That's another thing I could info dump about. Yeah.
And I'm Chihuahua sitting as well currently, so I hope that's not super audible in the background.
I mean, I could chime in on what I think the stereotype is, and I think that to Charlie's point, yes, I think that it's interesting that you mentioned how few people actually are making eye contact anymore. I think it's just a product of all of us being on things like Zoom, where we're all kind of looking at each other and things like that. But I think what it does is it shows how kind of utterly useless the question of are you making eye contact with me is. I think that and I think Charlie's point is that a lot of these things that we put, I want to make sure that I'm not putting words in your mouth, Charlie, so forgive me and feel free to clarify. I think a lot of the things that we do, that we pathologize about autism, that are signs for alarm or fear, are often things that allow us to adapt and survive in a neurotypical world. But to the question about what are some stereotypes, I think one of the big stereotypes that I would like to dispel is the idea that we aren't empathetic. I think, and this goes to the question about journalism. I think a lot of journalists, I think particularly in our field, we're told that you have to be a little detached. You have to be able to take a step back. You have to be able to separate yourself from what you're seeing. whereas I think that a lot of times, and I can't speak for every autistic person, but I think a lot of us feel feelings incredibly intensely. And I think that ability to, for lack of a better term, give a damn, enables us to connect with other people we're interviewing, particularly in very dire situations or in very personal settings, in a way that I don't think our neurotypical peers could. That's just my opinion.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would say that it's pretty special that some of us are often the underdogs and often victimized, because I feel like with the question of double empathy, I think we have a tendency to automatically see ourselves in the underdog, and that makes us strong reporters in a lot of ways.
Well,
Hell yeah.
I definitely agree with Eric and Charlie that, like, yeah, if I didn't care about things, like if I didn't care about other people, I wouldn't do this job. That would be a weird choice of profession. I think for me, the stereotype that I dislike most is that we are either all men or we are masters of camouflage who are super good at fitting in. And I am neither of those things. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like a lot of the narrative is sort of moving towards this idea that, like, you're either, if you're not like that stereotypical, like, good doctor, atypical Rain Man, whatever guy, that, like, you're basically indistinguishable from your peers. And I feel like it lets a lot of researchers and autism professionals off the hook for being wrong about autism for decades.
That's good.
Like, I don't feel like I camouflage. I feel like some people had blinkers on, honestly.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, just kind of jumping into the next question about doctors and diagnosis. If you don't mind sharing, how did you come upon your autism diagnosis? Did you get it early in life, or did you have to wait a while? As I said in the intro, I didn't get a correct diagnosis until last year, and I'm 37 now, and I didn't get a correct diagnosis until I was 36.
Is that for the panel, or?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's for the panel. Feel free to jump in about your basically your journey to diagnosis.
Oh, I hadn't answered that previous question.
Yeah, let Zack can answer the first question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. I was just making sure that I hadn't lost track somehow or had some like kind of tech failure. But so first of all, both Eric and Sarah named two of my big pet peeves, which are the empathy and the gendered aspect of it, respectively, which, I don't fault them for that, just because those are the kinds of things that we privately complain about to each other on a regular basis. But I mean, I guess my big thing is sort of connected to the empathy thing, the idea that we struggling to put this into the proper words, but I guess the idea that, I mean, while it's true that a lot of us tend to have issues in terms of social skills, the idea that that's like fixed and immutable, and the idea that we can't learn from mistakes and are like beneath being held accountable. Like, I mean, if I hate the idea that if an autistic person says something inappropriate, they're just given a pass rather than treating it as a learning experience the way a non-autistic person would be. And I think it's I think it's a form of positive discrimination that I would really like to see that I would really like to see get the boot. And particularly as someone who spent a lot of time growing up pre-diagnosis being making people angry by saying things that might not have been appropriate or germane to what was being talked about. And so, yeah, I hope I'm not rambling too much, but I really hope that I would really like people to understand that, like, autistic people are people, and that means that we are accountable to our community as well. And I'm very sorry about my needy cat.
What's your cat's name?
His name's Lucky.
Oh, Lucky, cute.
Honestly, like pets and children interrupting Zoom calls is one of the things that brings me the most joy. So
Same.
I don't like how bold they've gotten about getting on my desk, but maybe that'll be my incentive to actually clean up my workspace better so that they can push stuff off. And Leslie, I'm sorry, you were already moving into the next phase while I slowed everything down.
No, it's okay. I just wasn't, I didn't realize that you still had an answer that you wanted to do to the previous question. So now I'll go on to the next question, if that's okay with you guys. And, just whoever wants to speak, just jump in and answer this. So I'm curious what your path to diagnosis looked like. Were you diagnosed at a young age, or was it missed, and what that journey looked like for you?
So I think this is a fairly common trajectory, particularly for boys and men in my age cohort. Well, I guess entirely men. I don't think there are any boys in my age cohort at this point, but
There's some really min children in our age cohort, Zach.
I was misdiagnosed with ADHD in the late 90s, which was very much a period where the popular idea of autism was that it was like entirely sort of the like Rain Man style savants rather than maybe a verbal person who had some degree of masking skill. And I was diagnosed in 2003 formally, which was a period which was, I wouldn't say that much better in terms of popular understanding of autism conceptually or clinically. And, at the time, I was a white middle class boy, and so very much the type of person who was being noticed and counted by the diagnostic criteria.
Sarah, do you want to go next?
hold on, sorry. Yeah, so I got diagnosed in my 20s. I think like a lot of autistic people that are assigned female at birth, I was definitely a very weird kid, and my parents were told a lot of things like, well, she'll grow out of it, or, she'll, it'll be different in college, or, she's just smarter than the other kids and they don't really understand her because of that. I also, like a lot of other autistic people assigned female at birth, kind of went through like a carousel of ill-fitting psychiatric labels. Like I got an OCD diagnosis pretty early. I'm not obsessive compulsive. And yeah, so I didn't get an autism diagnosis until I was in my 20s. And that diagnosis happened because I sort of spectacularly fucked up my life. My first job wasn't in journalism. I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist initially. My first job was at a medical journal. And they fired me after less than 2 weeks for being a bad cultural fit, which in retrospect means I did something weird and nobody wanted to talk to me about it. And I sort of had like this like huge crisis and was in the hospital for a bit. had unstable housing, lived with my parents for a little bit. And like during that time period, my mom, I guess, had been doing some reading, and she was like, yeah, I think you might be on the spectrum. And I was like, no, I'm just a bad person. um, and so, yeah, so my parents were really supportive and ended up getting evaluated, and it was honestly life-changing. It really helped me reframe sort of why I am the way that I am, and I've found it a lot more helpful than some of the mental health diagnoses that I've had, because it isn't fixable. Like there isn't some medication that I'm going to get on and then I'm going to like be completely okay with being 10 minutes late for something. Like it's just, that's just not how it works. And so like it's kind of like weird that like accepting that this is just the way that I am was really weirdly liberating for me. So yeah, I think like a lot of other AFAB people have very different journeys than mine. I was very privileged because my parents had money and were supportive of my diagnosis. So obviously, like that's not something that's accessible to most people. Adult diagnosis is really expensive, and I've written about that before.
Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, you know, to Zach's points, I think Zach is like, I think you're what, a year older than I am? Like I'm 31, you're
32, yeah.
Yeah. Like I think that because the diagnostic criteria was changing around that same time, you saw the inclusion of Asperger's syndrome, you saw the idea, you saw in 1994, you saw the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Individual Disabilities Education Act, leading to increased diagnoses in the 1990s. That was really kind of the beginning of when I did it. Like initially, I think that like there was the diagnostic journey began like when I was getting screened in preschool. Like there was a preschool screening not too far from where I lived. My family lived in like near Madison, Wisconsin at the time. And there just happened to be a place that was doing free preschool screenings. And then but then went through a myriad of diagnoses, and then like 4 years later, we were living in Texas in a place that actually has like a great clinic, like I guess a really renowned clinic in in Texas, and that was the beginning of getting diagnosed with what was then Asperger's, now ASD. But I think that as a result of seeing how relatively early I got diagnosed compared to how relatively later a lot of other people I know got diagnosed, whether they're assigned female at birth, women, other people of color, a lot of people who English is their second language. That really is what motivated me to learn more about it. And I think to Sarah's point, it's not so much. I think that I don't want to diminish that masking isn't real. I think it is real. I think I think a lot of times every autistic person, not just women and not just people assigned female at birth, are masked, but everybody's forced to mask in one way or another as an autistic person. But I think a lot of times what's coded as masking is struggling to adapt and not not necessarily trying to mask, but just like keeping your head above water. And that's not to say that masking isn't real. It very much is real. A lot of us do try to have to fit into a box. There's a really great book, Unmasking Autism by Devin Price. That's fantastic. But I think that that's only one thing. So yeah. So sorry, that was a tangent.
Okay, Charlie.
I had my, huge epiphany after college, and I think a lot of us present probably are late diagnoses, especially, if we are here deviating from the norm of, being raised as boys, diagnosed as a child. So it's not so important what my journey was, but it's pretty important what we do with this feeling of having missed out and having been betrayed by our support networks growing up. we as adults, autistic adults and disabled adults, you know, there are so many instances in our past where we should have received help but didn't. And it's up to us as adults to work through that and still try to function and, you know, carry on.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sorry, can I
sorry.
just say one thing? I also
Sure.
want to add that, like, I don't think that professional diagnosis is actually necessary for a lot of people that are on the spectrum.
I don't either.
I think that self-diagnosis is valid. I think that oftentimes diagnosis is an economic privilege that people have. And it's not accessible to a lot of people, especially people who are lower income or people of color. So like, I have like a diagnosis, but it's very much a function of my privilege that I do. And so I just like, I try to like, I don't think diagnosis is as important as like realization and sort of like understanding yourself better.
Awesome. Let's see. We have our first audience question. Here it is from Steve. If you could change or adjust one thing about the cultural discourse around the concept of neurodiversity, what would it be?
So I can, if it's all right for me to go ahead.
Mhm.
I think it would be fantastic if the discourse was less dominated by non-autistic parents who, I mean, obviously, if you're raising a child, then you have your concerns, but also it's not about you and your quote unquote suffering. And not obviously there are some great parents of autistic children, and that's why I hate when not so great ones dominate the discourse so much.
Me too.
Yeah, but it's, you know, I think that this is largely a remnant of just how for years autism was treated as something that was exclusive to children somehow, which doesn't make much sense because children generally become adults, and it makes us entirely passive and reactive, and like the whole conversation becomes how other people deal with us, and that's the opposite of what I think the conversation should be if it's going to genuinely be about us.
Yeah, I would say that autism parents, non-autistic parents of autistic children, see themselves as warriors and survivors. And that's so damaging. And it harkens back to the mythology of the changeling. You know, they are so convinced that their child has been stolen from them. And that's always really hard to, you know, confront, I guess. Well, you know, they are sometimes confronting us, all of us present, as autistic adults, like we're doing something wrong by not being so ashamed, and not empathizing with their struggle and their battle. So I've recently started calling those families baseball jersey families. You know, when you see an inspiring Facebook post of a little autistic boy who has been taken to a baseball game and the pitcher comes out and shakes his hand, you know, that sort of like over the top puzzle piece, face paint, we are warriors thing, like I would hope it starts going away as more and more people understand that we can grow into functional, healthy adults. But I think it might be getting worse. I think all of, you know, parenting is really weird right now. I'm going to be forever childless, but I care deeply about children. And I think parenting is getting super weird. And conspiracy theories and anti-vax sentiment is getting so weird. And anti-vax talking points are so mainstreamed and stripped of context that they're getting very popular. And that goes hand in hand with autism parents.
Sarah, you were going to go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm sort of, when it comes to parents, I'm sort of in an interesting position because my job at the 19th is caregiving reporter. So I also report on parents of kids with disabilities, including autism. And I think I wish that people would stop blaming their kids and start blaming the system and the lack of resources. Like, don't get mad at your kid, get mad at your local representative. It's sort of like, it's just like, there are these systemic issues. The problem is the system, it's not your child. In terms of like a stereotype or a way that I would like the discourse to change, I would like there to be more focus on autistic people with intellectual disabilities and non-speaking autistic people. That's something that I try to integrate into my reporting as much as I can. I get that, like, it's really interesting when, you know, an autistic person does something like be a journalist or a lawyer or an advocate or, you know, like any of that stuff. Like, it's cool. Like, I understand like wanting to have role models and how important that is for younger people. But like, I feel like autistic people with intellectual disabilities and non-speaking autistic people deserve role models too. So I guess that would probably be my biggest issue, is to sort of just shift focus and for it not to be pity porn, like to really show that there are people in our community who have these disabilities and still have value. The other thing I'd want to change about the discourse, I guess, is I really hate like the whole autism is a superpower thing. I totally understand the appeal. Like, it's really great to think like, oh, well, you know, there's nothing wrong with me. Like, this is actually like good. Like, I understand like that reframing can be really helpful for people, but I just find it really annoying, honestly. Like, it's disability isn't bad, but it also isn't good. It just is. It's like saying being gay is a superpower, or like being a woman is a superpower. Like, no, that's just what you are. And I think that autism is much the same way.
Yeah. To Sarah's point about the superpower thing, I think this goes to how I wish things would change. I think that I think, and I write about this a little bit in my book. I think that you've seen in the past decade and a half, you've seen a lot of autism at work programs. And those are, I'm not deriding that, but I think that to the point about the superpower thing is that you're seeing a huge initiative for hiring autistic people, saying that, hire autistic people, they're more productive, or they're more loyal, or they're more this, and this. And I get again, to Sarah's point, I get the impulse, I get the sentiment, the intent is pure, I would like to think. But I think that what it does, to the point about computer coders and all that, I think what it does, and also to Sarah's point about people with intellectual disabilities, I think it almost elevates a certain type of autistic person, rather than an autistic person with intellectual disabilities. Not every, you know, I should say I got a C- when I took one computer coding class, and I was just like, I'm never doing this shit again. So I think that it's really important that we say that autistic people can have good jobs, you know, whatever they do, even if they're, you know, whether they are a computer coder, whether they're a janitor, whether they're, you know, a lawyer, but even, you know, and A, they deserve to be paid fully, like they deserve to be paid like a full living wage. But B, I think the other thing is that deeper than that, and I'm sorry for, this is my soapbox, but I think that even then, I think that we ascribe too much to autistic people's worth, to how much value they put out. And I go back to
Absolutely.
Rain Man in the Casino.
Absolutely.
The move in the shift in that movie with Tom Cruise is when Tom Cruise realizes his brother can make him money.
Mhm.
And I feel like we still are in that moment where like we only start to bond with people when we like accept autistic people when we realize they can make us money. And I think what we need to change, if I could change anything, what I would say is that autistic people and neurodiversity is for everybody. Everybody deserves rights. Everybody deserves to be treated as a human being. And it shouldn't just be tangential to how productive there are. Autistic people who are on SSI or SSDI, or who require TANF or who require 24-hour care and who can't work are just as worthy and as valuable as as autistic people who can do all those things. So that's my soapbox. I'm sure.
And going off of what Eric said, I'm not going to get into like people's or my personal opinions of Elon Musk as a person, because we don't have literally all night. But I do think that there could be like troublesome fallout of him being one of the most famous autistic people in the world, because it really should not be incumbent upon the median autistic person to be the next Elon Musk, either in terms of business success or like specifically being in STEM, which is again sort of where we are sorted in terms of the stereotype already.
I dropped my opinion of Elon Musk in the chat. I wrote about it for Slate last year.
It's a great piece, by the way. You should read it.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, on that topic, what do you think about so-called autistic, like very prominent, famous autistic people like Elon Musk or anybody else who get a stage and a platform to say whatever, and how do you think that impacts the autistic community as a whole, and what do you think we can do about it?
Well, definitely no one should be a representative for the entire community. Like no individual should represent the entire community. But it is comforting to see aging autistic people still succeeding. Obviously Anthony Hopkins and David Byrne, you know, they're just like steeping, they're just marinating and just living their, you know, elder weirdness, and it's always delightful to see.
Anthony Hopkins' Instagram and TikTok are also just fantastic for his dancing. So like, I can't help but love it. But that's just me.
Yeah. And I really love, you know, I love the number of famous autistic people currently who are women and girls, just because of how long
Yes.
that has been in the shadows. Whereas probably if you this is not something with an objective definition, but I think most people's list of the most famous autistic people would probably include Greta Thunberg, Susan Boyle, and Hannah Gadsby, who are not only all women, but they're all over the place in terms of age, in terms of career. Like again, there's this idea that you know, an autistic person can't be a performer or an activist, and obviously they're sort of blowing that out of the water. And again, they do not and should not represent the whole of the autistic experience, but I think that I think that their prominence is really important.
I want to add to that. I'm always talking about Demi Burnett from The Bachelor. She only just recently got her diagnosis, and she's such a good example of like young autistic women not being believed, and young autistic women struggling with alcohol abuse. To, you know, she was coping all these years, and her sobriety journey is also her diagnosis journey. And you know, that's the state a lot of autistic women live in, because there aren't as many resources and there isn't as much goodwill extended to a lot of them.
Yeah, as an autistic person who has been pretty open about addiction and my own substance use stuff, I really appreciate Demi Burnett, and I think one of the things that I love about Demi and Hannah Gadsby, and who was the guy from that you did a piece about in the Washington Post, Zach? Who was the guy who you did?
From was it Wentworth Miller?
Yeah, Wentworth Miller. What I also like about that, about these public celebrities, public figures as a whole, coming out as autistic, is a lot, especially I think with social media. And look, social media can be an absolute hellhole, but it can also be a place where you can talk and have an open interaction. I think that it's cool to, one thing that is kind of cool is seeing them, to Charlie's point, is seeing them grow and seeing them learn and progress about all the other stuff. Because we shouldn't, nobody should, to everybody's point, everybody's already this, we've all read it, we shouldn't expect perfection, and we shouldn't expect anybody to be representative, but seeing them have that growth and that learning process is not only like, oh, hey, yeah, they're learning stuff, it's cool, but then I think that them having that platform and them going along and learning things helps their non-autistic followers to learn and go along with them. So it's almost like you're doing it live action, as you're doing it as it's happening. And I don't think that can be discounted.
I actually kind of I think my one problem with sort of like the focus on celebrities is just that I feel like something that gets lost sometimes is that neurodiversity is a political movement. I actually have a profile coming out probably Friday of Julia Bascom, who's the executive director of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Like the political leader of the movement right now is a woman, and I just think that's, and also a lesbian, and I just think it's so exciting that like our leadership is more reflective of a lot of us who maybe have had our identities ignored. And yeah, I just think it's something I really strive to do as a journalist, is to sort of establish more institutional memory about the political structures that make up the neurodiversity movement, that make up our community. I think that something that happens a lot is that people forget the history because nobody's writing it down. And that's actually also just why I'm such a big fan of Steve Silberman's history of autism, neurotribes. That's why I'm a big fan of Eric's book, We're Not Broken. Like, as journalists, writing these stories down is so important. So I mean, I think celebrities are important, but I just really want to focus on like preserving institutional memory and the fact that neurodiversity is political.
I agree with Sarah. I should say I agree with like everything that Sarah says. And on top of that, I think what should be noted is that Sarah, if you read the endnotes of my book, I want to say like a third of the news stories about autism are Sarah's stories.
Hell yeah.
So it is not like, by the way, Zach, I love Spinal Tap, so don't worry about it at all. Like it doesn't, like Sarah is writing it in real time. And that is incredibly important, I think, because otherwise that doesn't exist. And I agree with you, and I agree with Sarah wholeheartedly that that it is that autism is that neurodiversity is an inherently political movement, just like the disability rights movement as a whole is an inherently political movement. And if there's anything that I've tried to do, I think Sarah is fantastic at the policy angle. I think what I've tried to do a little bit is look at the political and the campaign and the election angle and how politicians talk about it and use rhetoric. And I know that talk is only just that, it's just talk. But I think that rhetoric and how we discuss autism and how we discuss neurodiversity and who is advising presidential candidates and who is advising who is advising senators and who are advising members of Congress is equally as important. And that's why I think I've really put an emphasis on in the 2020 campaign, seeing who is advising Joe Biden on his disability policy, who is advising Elizabeth Warren on her disability policy, who is advising Bernie Sanders on his, people to judge and this, that, and the other. So that's just to say that I agree with Sarah's angle, and that I've tried to add a different perspective, but it's really like I'm piggybacking off everything that Sarah does. And I think all of us are basically riffing on what Sarah does.
I don't think that's true. I mean, I think all of us, something I really appreciate about this panel is that we have like a real diversity in terms of like the work that we produce. Like we're all doing really different kinds of things. And I think that's also exciting because like, you know, autistic people don't have to cover disability or autism. You can also be like you could cover the Hill, you could cover the environment, you can cover pro wrestling. Like it's just, we can do anything, except maybe I guess like yeah, I mean we could do anything except maybe like I don't know, make good eye contact at all times. But like yeah, like I don't know, I just think that this panel is just so exciting, and I think it just rules that there's so many of us now doing our own thing. And it's, yeah, I really appreciate everyone's work on this panel and respect everyone and what they're doing. I just think it's really cool. All right, I'm done nerding out about everybody.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna tell Sarah that this is, I don't think anyone here minds if anyone is nerding out, and it's great to have you here. This is my wife, Rachel. She's been, sorry about that.
Yeah, so anyway, can you guys tell everybody about like how you got into journalism and how did you know you wanted to be a journalist, and did you get any pushback along the way as far as being autistic and people saying, oh, you can't be a journalist in such a social field?
I really want to answer this because in high school, I used to come to the Columbia Scholastic Journalism conferences every year. And I, you know, despite having the background in journalism, student journalism, and, you know, then as an adult, I did not consider myself a journalist until like very recently, where I was like, oh, I guess that's what I do. And it took me a long time. And I think it's a very autistic thing to do, where you're like doing something and then not realizing that you're doing something. And then you look back and you're like, oh, I have a full career. Like I've been doing this whole time.
That is a very autistic moment. I think that Charlie makes a good point. I think that like nobody explicitly told me no. I don't think. Like I knew I wanted to be a journalist since I was like 15 years old. And my parents were kind of like, okay, buddy, you can't, play in bands, the rest of your life. You need to actually find an actual legitimate job. And so I picked something just as equally stable in journalism. But like, I think that more than people saying no, I think that it was the structural barriers. Nobody really stopped me. It was just not recognizing the structural problems that I had within journalism, realizing that I had trouble with sensory processing, realizing that I could ask for accommodations, realizing that I could disclose to my employers, realizing all these things. So I don't want to say, I'd be lying if I said that like there was ever anybody who told me specifically no, but I think that that's almost, and I don't want to diminish anybody's experience, that's almost the easy part, It's the structural stuff, the embedded stuff that I think is just as important, if not more important. I don't really care. You know, if somebody tells me no, then I'm going to say fuck you. But if it's much harder to, and you guys could vouch for this or not, it's much harder to surmount the deeper structural.
Yeah, I think we are all too afraid to ask questions sometimes, specifically like, how do I do this thing? How do I get a press pass? You know, how XYZ, and we're afraid to ask. And that comes up in all aspects of our lives. And, you know, we think that non-autistics have the rule book, and we don't, and we're really embarrassed about it.
I mean, my origin story in terms of journalism is honestly just that it kind of runs in my family. My mother and her mother and were both in the business, and now I suspect that autism runs in my family to some extent too, just because my grandfather would apparently tell anyone who would listen that his idea of hell was that every surface was sticky, and had this like entire stump speech about how red pandas are superior to giant pandas. But I was never specifically told I couldn't do anything, but again, I have, I guess, sort of encountered the specific challenge of there just being so much that no one explicitly tells you how to do or where you're supposed to be or what you're supposed to be doing. And I think that I was a little more prepared for that than I might have otherwise been, just because college there's so much of that involved in just getting through college too. Just, I think that particularly for autistic and neurodivergent people, a lot of the early parts of higher education is realizing that you're not being given explicit instructions like you are in high school. And I don't know, I think that trained me a little better for the extent to which I have to do that as a professional journalist, even though I still feel like whenever I'm like talking to a member of Congress, I'm sort of sounding like Chris Farley going, do you remember when you were with the Beatles? But yeah, it's my spiel.
I think so. I had sort of a non-traditional trajectory in that, like, the thing that precipitated my autism diagnosis was like the fact that I spent a good chunk of my 20s just like getting fired and not having a place to live and just like kind of not being a functional person. So I came to journalism fairly late in my life. It wasn't something that I knew I wanted to do when I was growing up. I started working for medical journals, then I got my diagnosis, then I started working in sort of like disability nonprofits because that's who would hire me with the work history that I had. And then I sort of fell into journalism slowly. I tried starting my own outlet called NOS Magazine with like a small grant that I got from the Mitsubishi Electric America Foundation. It didn't succeed, but I'm really proud of the work that it produced.
It was great.
I'm really bad at asking people for money is what I learned. But what I am good at is so I guess like the part of why journalism worked out for me is because like I feel like there's like a Venn diagram of like things I'm good at, things people will conceivably pay me money to do, and things I enjoy doing, and kind of like journalism turned out to be the sweet spot for me. But it took me a really long time to figure that out. So yeah, I guess like I would probably have had an easier time if I had, if I knew I wanted to be a journalist, if I'd written for my school paper, if I'd had the right internships. But I feel like that experience that I had when I was younger was really invaluable because it meant that, like, sometimes I'm the only, like, I think I'm one of the few people that's reported on Medicaid that's actually been on it. Like having that direct personal experience with the systems involved was really formative for me, and I think it informs my reporting. In terms of being told no, I think it goes back to like, I think the way that I'm most often told no is kind of goes back to like this question of like what objectivity is and what, when you need, like when telling both sides of the story is appropriate or inappropriate. I applied for, I'm not going to name the outlet, but I applied for like this fancy legacy fellowship last year. And a lot of people were really, encouraging me to apply. And I did end up getting a personal email from it. And it was a personal email from the fellowship director saying that he felt that I was more of an activist than a journalist. And it was soul crushing. So like, I mean, yeah, I mean, I feel like for me, the ways that I've been told no have had to do with like perceptions of objectivity, perceptions of my ability to tell the stories of my own community, perceptions of like whether I should be both sidesing the Judge Rotenberg Center where they like electrocute kids to punish them for like twitching too much. Like just, yeah, I don't know. Something I really appreciate about my outlet, the 19th, is that they don't make me do that. I'm allowed to bring my whole self to work and it's seen as an asset. And I just really love that and wish that it was more common. Because yeah, I think like the situations where I've been told most is when I've tried to tell a story in what I think is a humane and empathetic way, but didn't mesh with, dominant narratives about how autism is like a horrifying affliction upon our families that causes nothing but suffering.
What can journalists do who are in the autistic community who often have a stake in these issues? What can we do to sort of dispel this notion that if you are in a community and you're reporting about that community, that you're somehow a quote unquote activist and you deserve to be taken less seriously?
I can say this because I think I've been on both ends. I've been an editor and I've been a reporter. I think that like my modus operandi, my mantra has always been, I don't give a damn what your perspective is as long as you have the goods, I don't really care what your ideology is. If you have the goods, you have the goods. If you have and when I say you have the goods, like if you actually have the story, if you have the facts, then you should be fine. And like I think that like it's important to recognize, to Sarah's point, that a lot of times the people who think that they are most above ideology and who are non-biased often bring their own biases to news judgments, and that's just because they bring, and that's not necessarily, they're not intentionally doing it, it's because they bring with it the unconscious biases that we all have about something. Whereas like I've always kind of flipped it on it. I've always been an advocate for not an advocate in the policy ways. I've always been an advocate for saying that people from certain communities have a sensus fidelium, so to speak, of how of that community that outsiders wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And that is a form of objectivity as well, because you have an understanding of the facts that people otherwise wouldn't have. So in the same way that I wouldn't necessarily have an understanding of gender if I recover women's rights, I think in the same way, I bring a perspective because I don't necessarily bring a perspective, but I have an understanding of the facts. I know who to call, and I know I know the resources, and I know all the different, the proper language for a lot of these other, for any kind of subject that a lot of other people wouldn't otherwise have. So I've always really been an advocate for arguing that I'm not necessarily saying I'm not a fan of neutrality, but I do think that there is such a thing as objective truth. And I think that people from marginalized communities can get to a better understanding of objective truth than people from outside those communities.
And people are, in a lot of cases, more likely to open up to you as well. Like,
Yes.
I mean, if you're perceived as part of a community, then a lot of people will give you a different perspective from one member of the community to another, as opposed to like subject and reporter in two different circles of the Venn diagram.
Yes.
I think the view from nowhere is fake. And anyone that doesn't think it is probably needs to take a look at their own biases.
You how can we got this question a little bit earlier, but how can non-autistic journalists support autistic journalists as allies in newsrooms?
I have a perfect example. So I don't mean to butt in and be the person who was, but like I have a perfect example of, I was working at a very respected news outlet. And every Friday we would have editorial meetings where we would read editorial pitches from writers. And I remember one time my boss had a suggest, this is a really good piece, we should run it. And they said that everybody is acting autistic. And I wanted to raise hell. And I didn't. But what I did is this was a union shop. So what I did is I went to the union group chat, and I said, "Look, I want to." And this was also a weekend I was going to go on vacation. So I was like, I don't want to deal with this. I also just don't want to. I don't want to stir shit up, and I also don't want to be the pissed off disabled person. And I said, this is bullshit. And part of me for swearing so much, but then like, incidentally enough, one of my coworkers said, "Look, I'll take it up with our editor." And that was one thing. He was somebody who had been there for a while. He was somebody who had been there for a lot longer than I had, and had established credibility so he could go to our boss and say, "This is unacceptable." And I think that's an example, is that sometimes, especially if you don't have confidence in leadership and wherever you're working, it's not necessarily that the leadership is bad, it's just that they just don't know a lot of stuff. It's always good to have people there are always good people who you could work with, even outside, if it's somebody outside your work who you can talk with and who you can bounce ideas back and forth on, and somebody who's a confidant. I think that's always important, is having somebody who you trust, who you can, who's kind of your court of appeals, so to speak. I can't understate the importance of being a non-autistic person who other people can trust, who autistic people can trust. Same deal could be for men who advocate for women in the newsrooms, straight people who advocate for LGBTQ plus people, white people. You get the picture.
So
Yeah, I think, oh,
go ahead.
can I think about this negative example of autism in the workplace, but I recently had somewhat recently had an issue with a mega celebrity, like definitely the most famous person whose phone number I have. And I did something that she did not like, that she contacted my editor about. And there was a gap of time between when she was talking to my editor and my editor was talking to me. And he ended up being like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, Charlie's autistic, blah, blah, blah. Maybe they don't know the professional." Yeah, Eric's facial expression is correct. And he was
Jesus.
he was bowing to her because she is such a mega celebrity. And then I had a phone call with him, and he realized that I was right and did nothing wrong, and that she is just a mega celeb who didn't want to be pushed when she was giving pageant answers. I was trying to have a real interview with her. She was trying to give sound bites. And so I think now he understands not to do that. But you can't go back from that. You can't close that door once you've opened it. And that's going to be an experience a lot of people have when celebrities want to walk all over us, or politicians want to walk all over us. And we are attempting to report truth, and we are attempting to tell interesting stories with lots of facts. Sometimes we're not allowed to.
So I think that one of the big things that has become apparent, particularly since the COVID pandemic began, is that I think that it would behoove particularly management within the journalism industry to understand like this multi-year demonstration we've gotten of the extent to which journalists can do their jobs without necessarily being all crammed into a standardized model where everybody is sitting at their desks next to one another day to day, typing on their little computers, because we have by necessity been showing how we have been just sort of terraforming our own comfort zone to deal with the current pandemic, and continuing to put in the work. And I would really like for the people who make these decisions to take note of that, and take note of how it has not been the end of news as a profession.
I think for me, non-disabled, non-autistic allies have been invaluable in my career. I know that we're all sort of in our late 20s, in our 30s, and that has to do with sort of this wave of autism diagnoses that happened at a certain point, and has to do with when the diagnostic criteria changed, when information became more available to people through the internet so they could identify themselves. So there aren't older autistic journalists, or even very many older journalists with disabilities that I could turn to when I started doing this and go hey, so I need help. So I mean, I feel like there are non-autistic journalists who are older, like Joe Shapiro at NPR, or Lulu Miller at Radiolab, that have just really put their necks out for me and were willing to recommend me when I didn't have the perfect resume or the right internship. And having people put their faith in me like that and really support me and really plug my work has been so important. And a lot of the folks who do that are often family members who have autistic kids or autistic siblings, and they're invested in you because they see they're invested in you because they love their family and they understand that you have value and that you have potential. So I just I mean, I think allies are super important, and I'm really grateful to the allies that.
I have an anecdote that I think, Zach, were you about to talk?
I was just gonna say, I think that considering what Sarah has said, since what Sarah was saying, since we are all of fairly close together age cohort in this, from this particular generation that has been more attuned in terms of diagnoses and supports. I really think that this is a golden opportunity for us to be the mentorship network that didn't necessarily exist when we were coming up.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I have almost a talk about neurotypicals not understanding social norms or something like that. I have a great story. It's almost kind of the flip side of Charlie's story. That was if you saw my facial reaction, it was that was incredibly screwed up. I'm sorry you went through that, Charlie. But I had this one professor, and I read this in my book. His name was Farrell Guillory. He was this old Southern gentleman. He used to have pristine white shirts, spectacle glasses. He had a very heavy accent from Louisiana. I remember I had like a class with him one time, and you had to write a column every week. And I remember my first one, I didn't do too bad, but like it was just really hard to, to do it and navigate it. But I remember like after like my first assignment, he brought me into his office, he brought me into it, and then he said, "Do you want to talk?" And he closed the door. He said, "I just gotta ask, do you have Asperger's?" And professors do not do this. I think that's like a violation of like FERPA or something like that, or HIPAA or something. Like we all have been talking about that's a HIPAA violation. I think that actually is a HIPAA violation. Um, but then I, on one hand I wanted to pop him, but on the other hand I was like, how'd you know? And he says, "Look, I have a loved one who's autistic, who has Asperger's syndrome. It was then called Asperger's syndrome." And he said, I care about him." And so to Sarah's point, it's like it's people who care and who love autistic people, and they see that they have a vested interest in autistic people succeeding and thriving, and that really goes a long way. Is that loving someone can really go. The same deal goes with my old mentor Ron Fournier, who brought me on a national journal. He has a son who's autistic, who's now in college. But that was incredibly important for him. So for me, and I'll always be grateful to Ron and to my old professor, Professor Phil Guillory, because without that, I don't think I would have a job today. So.
So how do you navigate self-disclosure in the newsroom, and what have you had to weigh, the benefits and drawbacks about being so open online about your autism?
I mean, disclosure is not really a question for me at this point. Like, I've written about being autistic in like the print edition of the Washington Post. Like, it's very Googleable. So whether to disclose or not disclose has not been a question for me for basically my whole career. But actually, a younger autistic journalist who's in broadcast journalism actually recently asked me and a few other older autistic journalists like whether to disclose, and I actually didn't know what his answer should be. I mean, for me, like, I sort of had to disclose because my into journalism was my life experience. But I don't know, like it's such a complicated question. It's a double-edged sword, because if you don't disclose, sometimes people will think you're bad at your job, or just like really weird, or that you don't like them. At one of my older jobs, I got called into HR one time because one of my coworkers thought that I sounded condescending, and I had to be like, look, I'm on the spectrum and it's just my voice. Like, yeah, it's so complicated, because on the other hand, like if you do disclose, sometimes people will see you as less competent, see you as less of a person, kind of talk to you like you're like a little kid. Are you okay? They might not give you the opportunities that you are capable of and that you deserve. So it's such a hard question, and I honestly don't know what people should do. I think that's something that everybody has to work out for themselves in their own circumstances, and it's very complicated.
I agree.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think sometimes freelancers are at an advantage, over staff writers, because job to job, you could not disclose or disclose, and you're not necessarily in an office, even without COVID. I mean, a lot of staff writers are no longer in offices, but if you are not talking to the same people week after week, there's a little more freedom to not reinvent yourself, but share angles of yourself and angles of your reporting with some people, and not other people.
The reason that I have always felt the need to disclose is had a conversation with my wife a while ago where she said, you know, you mask well enough that people tend to be taken aback when circumstances cause it to slip. And I think that, you know, I think that she's right about that. And so that's why I think that it's good to, for me personally, to get disclosure out of the way, so it doesn't come up in a way that, you know, for lack of a better term, people are finding out the hard way. But again, I agree with Sarah that it's very much down to individual circumstances. You might not necessarily be walking that particular tightrope that I am. And so if you feel like it's not something that you want to disclose, and I realize that this makes it fairly useless as advice per se, to just say, well, that you need to figure out your truth. But it's I guess that's what I can offer in terms of how it has historically worked out for me.
Yeah, I think that you know, I when I started out in my career, I didn't want to disclose because I didn't want people to. I didn't want stigma, but then like but then like I started spinning out at work. You know, just because I just didn't, you know, I didn't follow social decorums, or I would come off, you know, I didn't know how to, you know, or if I did, you know, if I came off as brusque and I didn't initially mean to or whatever. But I think that what I say is that, like, you know, to Zach's point, I can't tell anybody whether you should disclose or you shouldn't disclose. That's somebody's own business. And there are people who can't afford to disclose. There are people who can disclose. And that's the same for any for any profession that's not just journalism. Um, the thing that I've said in the past, and I maintain, is that while it's not a perfect barometer, one thing that I try to do whenever I'm writing, whenever I'm thinking about disclose, like before I could write, you know, disclose, what I tell people is, like, take a look at the office culture around you. You know, if you're employed, you know, um, take a look at, there are a lot of newsrooms that say they're equitable, that say they're inclusive, that say they're open, but then you look at it and they're just not, or the culture isn't that great. So one thing I say is, like, take a look at, you know, the practice. How many, for example, how many women are in leadership? Because a lot of newsrooms, I think everybody can agree with this. Sarah, you actually work in a newsroom almost entirely with women, or so. But like, are there women not good? But like a lot of newsrooms, women are staff writers, but then but all the editorial leaders are men. So like, are there women in leadership? What is the makeup of people of color in the newsroom? What does that look like? What is turnover? Oftentimes you can find those out on, Glassdoor or Indeed or whatever. You can look at the turnover in a staff room, in a newsroom. You can also, and then the other thing is, like, just see, like, just even the simplest thing, like, is the newsroom wheelchair accessible? Like that, all those things, like, I call them almost disclosure circumstantial evidence. They're not hard evidence, but they are kind of an indicator that this is a place that could be open to change. And it might make you more okay with being willing to talk about it. But again, that is just, those aren't a perfect barometer, but they can kind of help.
I see that we're kind of winding down. Are there any final thoughts that the panelists have that you'd like to share with people as sort of a takeaway?
Well, first of all, Leslie, thank you so much for putting this together. And
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really useful thing in terms of establishing what I'm talking about, in terms of what I was talking about, in terms of being able to mentor future generations of disabled journalists. And I really hope that we have, successfully projected that that people within reason obviously can come to us if they want advice in terms of what has worked for us and how we feel about the state of journalism and news gathering as a profession.
Oh, shoot, I can't. To Zach's point, I'm just grateful that we have this panel. You know, to Sarah's point and to Zach's point earlier, by virtue of the diagnostic criteria not really being that great when we were growing up, there aren't that many people who came before us. But nowadays, like I get like, I can't speak for anybody else, but I get DMs and Instagram, and I get, you know, that to me, that's the coolest thing, you know, like college students and even high school students or parents of kids who want to work in journalism now email and DM me and like, or text me or whatever. And that's awesome.
Mhm.
And I think that it's that the fact that we can discuss this, the fact that all of us regularly chat, and we were like discussing this in a group chat, like you know, what's the best thing we could do? How do we make the most out of this discussion? You know, like we were discussing this last week, you know, that you know, I think that's incredible. And I think that we very much are starting this beat, or we're starting our coverage in a way, or we're changing newsrooms. And hopefully it's easier, and we're going to get things wrong, of course, just like anybody else, but the kids who come after us are going to get it right, but they're going to owe us a debt. And I think that's the coolest thing. And the fact that, Leslie, the fact that you're opening this, you're doing this is incredible. The fact that students even care to join this is awesome. The fact that it's being hosted by Columbia University, which was a school that I didn't have the grades to get into, you know, is awesome. So yeah, that, you know, that's awesome. That slaps. Yeah.
I think my biggest thing. Oh,
no, you can go first. Sorry.
Okay. My biggest thing is that success isn't linear, and that you know, you don't necessarily by a certain age have to have these many credits. You know, I want to say, if you're older than me, stay in line. You know, that meme of stay in line, because, you know, there are so many people who do gig economy, you know, jobs in addition to writing, and often have, you know, self-esteem hangups about that. And I think we should keep in mind that writing isn't like the most noble thing, you know, that if you have to work and make money in things that aren't journalism, you're still probably a great journalist. So that's my thing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Charlie that, yeah, it's not linear. You don't have to know when you're like, you know, a teenager what you're going to do when you're 30 or 40 or 50. It's okay to not know what you want to do. I'm so excited that this club exists, to be honest, that there is like a disabled journalist group at Columbia, that there's one at Berkeley now, that this is like a thing, that it's a thing, that like there's enough of us that we're organizing, and we're just going to be so much stronger as a collective, like organized group, than we have been independently. And I'm just so excited for the future of disability in journalism. So thank you for hosting this, because I'm just really happy you guys exist.
Same here. I'm thrilled that this even is a thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you so much to Shannon, the treasurer of the Columbia Student Disability Network and a member of the Alliance of Journalists with Disabilities. She ran all of the Zoom stuff that I didn't know how to do with the panel. And thanks to Amanda, our vice president for the Alliance of Journalists with Disabilities. And thanks to Yashvi, who had to go, who's the Vice President of this Columbia Student Disability Network. And most of all, thank you to all of our panelists, Sara, Zack, and Sara, Zack, Charlie, and Eric for coming and for doing a wonderful job of sharing what it's like to be an autistic journalist. I really appreciate everybody who made this event possible. So thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you. You guys all worked so hard, and I appreciate that we were able to do this.
Yeah.
Great that we were able to do this. And anybody, I'm going to drop my email in the chat right now. So if anybody wants to email me,
I'm gonna.
this is my personal email. And then, but I also tweet way too much, and my DMs are open against my better judgment before Elon Musk abducts me. So I'm just putting that in I'm just dropping that. I check my DM.
I'm on an iPad, so I can't access the chat, but can someone type up my website, hanikalewinski.com, because for anyone in New York or New Jersey or Pennsylvania who can come to New York, I'm always open for headshot slots and always flexible with my rates, especially if you are a student. So let's all look professional and get hired.
Charlie did my headshots and they're great.
Yeah, if you were brought here by the flyer that has been around, Charlie took the pictures of both Sarah and myself, and they did a fantastic job, obviously.
The photos look fantastic, so Charlie's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, that website is in the chat along with everyone's emails. Thank you all so much for joining us. This was amazing.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, have a great night, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.